Cops laugh at twin black sisters in court, freezes when they reveal their darkest DOJ secret. Imagine two innocent sisters, handcuffed and humiliated, staring down corrupt cops who think they've won, but what if one shocking revelation could shatter their entire world? Twin sisters Alana and Amara didn't expect to be on the wrong side of the law. They'd always been diligent students, community volunteers, and most importantly, each other's lifeline. Yet, on a crisp autumn morning, they found themselves standing in a crowded courtroom, hearts pounding. Across the aisle stood two smug police officers, men who had arrested them under dubious circumstances and who now smirked with unsettling confidence. Little did these officers know that behind the scenes, the U.S. Department of Justice, led by Attorney General Merrick Garland, was quietly unearthing their darkest secret, and once that secret surfaced, it would change everything. But wait, what if the evidence they planted wasn't just a bag of powder, but the key to exposing a massive police conspiracy? Alana and Amara Mitchell had always shared the kind of bond unique to twins. From a young age, they were each other's shadows, finishing each other's sentences and forging paths of mutual support. Raised in a modest neighborhood in Hawthorne City, Mississippi, they stood out for their academic brilliance and unwavering optimism. Their mother, Clarice, worked tirelessly as a social worker, while their father, Leonard, was a history teacher at the local high school. Together, the family embodied a quiet resilience, taking pride in their heritage and determined to contribute positively to the community around them. On a humid July evening, life took a sharp turn. Alana and Amara had spent the day volunteering at a local youth program, helping children practice reading and math skills for the upcoming school year. The two sisters, both in their early 20s, had a lighthearted argument over who would treat whom to an ice cream afterward. They settled on a small place near the city park, an area that they knew was usually teeming with families and friendly faces. However, on this night, a strange tension hung in the air. A police cruiser slowly shadowed them as they walked toward their car. At first, neither sister gave it much thought. Hawthorne City's police presence was common, and often the officers were polite, if a bit distant. But something about the pointed stares from the two white officers in the cruiser set them on edge. The police car circled them twice before finally pulling alongside. "Evening," said Officer Darren Walters, stepping out of the vehicle. His partner, Officer Brent Kilroy, remained seated, scanning the surroundings. Walters rested a casual hand on his holster, his expression unreadable. "Good evening, officer," Amara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Alana stood by her side, bristling at the sight of Walters' relaxed but ready stance. "Can we help you?" Alana asked politely. Walters didn't immediately answer. He walked around them, eyes drifting from Alana's sneakers to Amara's braided hair, as though looking for anything that might give him cause. Finally, he asked, "Mind showing me some ID?" The request was abrupt, and neither sister could think of a valid reason for it, but they complied. Alana fumbled through her small purse to retrieve her driver's license, while Amara produced hers from a back pocket. Walters examined both IDs, then paused. "There was a report of suspicious activity near the park," Walters said vaguely. "You two fit the description." Amara's heart pounded. She'd heard stories of friends and acquaintances who had been stopped for matching some generic description. She forced herself to remain calm. "What kind of suspicious activity, officer?" Walters smirked. "We ask the questions, not you." At that moment, Kilroy stepped out of the cruiser, making his way toward them. He flashed a sarcastic smile, eyebrows rising in mock curiosity. "Any weapons on you, ladies?" "Anything we should know about?" he asked. Not bothering to hide the insinuation. Alana's jaw clenched. "No, of course not." "We'd like to search your vehicle," Walters stated, pointing to the sisters' old sedan parked a few feet away. Under normal circumstances, the sisters knew they could refuse a search if there was no probable cause. But they also recognized the power dynamic at play. Two white officers exuding an air of condescension had them cornered on a deserted stretch near the park. The risk of escalation was high, and argument or any sign of disrespect could end very badly. With reluctance, Alana shrugged. "Go ahead," she said quietly, glancing at Amara, who offered a resigned nod. The search began. Walters and Kilroy opened every door, rummaged through the trunk, tossed aside the sisters' jackets and volunteer pamphlets. Minutes later, Walters suddenly held up a small plastic bag that neither sister had ever seen before. Inside was a substance that looked like powder. He smirked triumphantly. "Look what we have here," Walters announced. "Possession of a controlled substance, ladies." Time seemed to freeze. Amara's voice came out in a cracked whisper. "That's not ours. We've never seen that before." Her words fell on deaf ears. Kilroy quickly placed them under arrest, reading them their rights with a performative flourish. The walk to the cruiser felt like a tunnel of dread. Neighbors peered out of windows, some with concern, others with the same smug curiosity the cops wore. For Alana and Amara, everything happened too fast. Their worry soared to unimaginable heights. They had dedicated their lives to doing things the right way. They volunteered, they studied, they stayed out of trouble. And now, in the blink of an eye, they were cuffed, placed in the back of a police car, and labeled as criminals. Little did they know, this was just the beginning. The evidence against them would be stacked in the blink of an eye, and soon they'd find themselves standing in court, the target of condescending laughter. But as grim as it appeared, forces outside this small Mississippi town were quietly taking notice and preparing to intervene in ways that no one could have foreseen. Stay tuned, Dark Stories viewers. What happens when federal agents uncover the cops' hidden files, and the sisters fight back with a secret that could topple an entire department? The cell was cold, its walls painted a faded beige. Alana and Amara were placed in a holding area inside the Hawthorne City Police Station. An unwelcoming fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting hard shadows across the room. The sisters exchanged anxious glances, their hearts still racing from the abrupt arrest. They had been stripped of their belongings, purses, phones, and dignity, and left to wait. Time in that musty cell seemed to crawl. Eventually, an officer they hadn't seen before, Sergeant Miriam Foley, walked in with a clipboard. She was middle-aged, with a stern countenance that reminded Alana of a strict principal. Yet there was something kinder in Foley's eyes compared to Walters and Kilroy. She asked a series of questions, basic details about addresses, next of kin, and health conditions, without meeting their gaze. Still, her voice lacked the harsh edge that had marked their initial interaction with the arresting officers. "Any allergies?" Foley inquired, her pen poised over the clipboard. Amara cleared her throat. "No, none." Foley jotted something down. "Your bail hearing will be scheduled as soon as possible," she added, closing her folder. "But given the severity of the charges, it might not be tonight." "Severity?" Alana blurted out. "We don't even know what we're being charged with exactly." "Those drugs weren't ours." Foley's eyes flickered. She exhaled softly, then left without another word, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Amara let out a shuddery breath, sinking to a bench. "They planted that bag, Alana," she murmured, hugging herself. "I'm sure of it. But how do we prove it?" Alana dropped beside her twin. "We have to call Mom and Dad. We need a lawyer, someone who will believe us. This can't hold up in court, can it?" But anxiety churned in her stomach. She knew that in many small towns, the justice system could be anything but just. They had heard horror stories of young black people being railroaded by falsified evidence or coerced confessions. Now, that haunting possibility was their reality. Hours dragged by. Eventually, an officer came to escort them, one by one, to separate interrogation rooms. Alana's turn came first. A table and 2 chairs stood in the middle of a tiny room with drab walls and a single overhead light. Seated on the opposite side of the table was Officer Walters, a tight-lipped smirk on his face. He gestured for Alana to sit, then propped himself up, crossing his arms. "So, Alana, you want to tell me where you got that little stash in your trunk?" Alana tried to steady her breathing. "I told you, it's not mine. We were volunteering tonight." Walters waved a dismissive hand. "Right, you two are squeaky clean good girls. That's what they all say. But I have a job to do. See, we got an anonymous tip earlier about 2 women seen around the park looking like they were dealing, and now I find drugs in your trunk. How am I supposed to ignore that?" Heat rushed to Alana's face. She leaned forward, voice quivering. "I don't care what tip you got, it's a lie. We've never dealt drugs in our lives. We've never even touched them." Walters clicked his tongue, feigning disappointment. "You can save the story for court, unless," he glanced at her with a predatory gleam in his eye, "unless you're willing to cooperate." "Cooperate," she repeated, eyes narrowed. He shrugged. "Tell me who's really behind it, and I might recommend a deal to the district attorney. You give me some bigger fish, maybe it could take the heat off you and your sister." His tone was honeyed, calculating. Alana's heart thundered. She knew exactly what he was doing, trying to fabricate a scenario in which they would implicate someone else to get themselves off the hook. But that would be perjury, a lie, and there was no one to implicate. This was all a sham, a setup meant to pad police stats or maybe something darker. Her voice shook. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Walter's face hardened. "So that's how you want to play it? Fine." He stood, grabbed the file on the desk, and walked to the door. "We'll see how well you and your sister like jail when the charges are official." He left Alana alone, her stomach churning with dread. Minutes later, an officer led her back to the holding cell. Amara was returned a few minutes later, eyes watery and red. Neither wanted to speak about what was said, but both feared their next steps. The first sign of hope came just before dawn. Their parents had arrived at the station, accompanied by a local attorney, Nina Barnes, a petite woman with close-cropped hair and a fiery demeanor. She demanded that Alana and Amara be given an immediate hearing to argue for bail. There was some back-and-forth wrangling, but eventually, the sisters were told they'd see a judge that afternoon. Exhaustion pulled at Alana's eyelids as she slumped in a corner of the cell. In that moment, she wished desperately that all of this was a nightmare she could wake from. Amara squeezed her hand, their fingers interlocking the way they had when they were small children, terrified of thunder. They had no idea that the storm awaiting them was far more destructive than any thunderclap. But if there was any solace, it was in their solidarity, and in the knowledge that someone beyond the small, corrupt bubble might be watching. Don't go anywhere, Dark Stories fans. The Courtroom showdown is about to explode, with laughter turning to terror as the sisters' DOJ bombshell drops. The afternoon sun bore down as Alana and Amara stepped out of the police transport van and onto the worn steps of the Hawthorne City courthouse. Their wrists were handcuffed in front of them, drawing murmurs from onlookers who recognized the twins from their volunteer work or college honors. The sisters capped. Their heads high, though each step felt heavy with dread. Inside the courthouse, old fans spun lazily overhead, barely dispersing the stagnant heat. Their attorney, Nina Barnes, led the way to a small conference room where their parents waited with anxious eyes and trembling hands. Leonard Mitchell squeezed his daughter's shoulders, his voice cracking as he reassured them that they'd make it through. Clarice wiped away tears, telling them to keep faith. Nina then quickly ushered them into final preparations, explaining the bail process and cautioning them to remain calm, no matter what was said or done. Moments later, they entered the courtroom. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators, reporters, and curious townspeople. The county judge, a stout man named Judge Albert Cohen, presided from an elevated seat. Across the aisle, they saw Officers Walters and Kilroy leaning casually against a wall, exchanging whispers and smirks. When Alana and Amara were asked to approach the stand, the hush in the room was palpable. Nina presented a concise argument for granting bail. The twins had strong ties to the community, clean records, and were clearly not flight risks. But then the assistant district attorney stood, reading from a stack of papers that claimed the sisters were found with a significant quantity of a controlled substance and thus posed a risk to public safety. "What we have here," the ADA stated, "is a case of suspected drug trafficking. The law must respond firmly to protect our community." From the back of the courtroom, Walters let out a chuckle, soft, but loud enough for Alana to hear. Kilroy followed with a derisive snort. It was a moment of shared disrespect, an insult that sliced through the already tense air. Alana's cheeks burned. She felt humiliation and outrage surge in her chest. They were laughing at her, at Amara, at the injustice of it all. A wave of anger threatened to overwhelm her, but she remembered Nina's advice: remain calm, remain polite. She took a breath to steady herself. Judge Cohen peered over his spectacles. Miss Barnes, does the defense have any rebuttal to these claims of a larger trafficking operation? Nina clasped her hands. Yes, Your Honor. My clients vehemently deny any involvement with narcotics. They have robust evidence of their whereabouts prior to their arrest, documented volunteer hours at the local youth center. We request that the court release them on their own recognizance or set a reasonable bail. The judge paused, tapping his gavel lightly against his desk, as if thinking. After a beat, he said, bail is granted, though I will set it at a relatively high amount, given the seriousness of the charges. He scribbled a figure high, but not unattainable for the Mitchells. After some financial maneuvering, a collective sigh of relief fluttered from Alana, Amara, and their parents. Nina nodded stiffly. Thank you, Your Honor. But as they turned to leave, the sneering laughter from Walters and Kilroy echoed again. The officers exchanged hushed words, something about rich girls who get what they deserve. Alana's fists clenched. She could see that Amara was equally livid. The day's ordeal didn't end in the courtroom. As soon as the hearing was over, local news reporters bombarded the sisters and their parents outside on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust into their faces. The swirling chaos of questions about the alleged drugs, the severity of the charges, the family's reaction pelted them from every side. Words like trafficking and conspiracy echoed ominously. Nina deftly navigated the storm of reporters, issuing a curt statement of innocence while urging the public not to jump to conclusions. Are you suggesting the police planted evidence? One bold reporter asked, thrusting a mic toward Alana. She opened her mouth, but Nina quickly interjected. We are conducting our own investigation. There will be no further comment at this time. They made their way to a waiting car, courtesy of a family friend, who drove them from the courthouse to a small diner down the street. Exhausted and emotionally raw, they collapsed into a booth, each ordering something soothing, a warm meal, a cup of tea or coffee. The overhead television droned with midday news, but Alana could hardly focus on anything besides the dread swirling in her mind. This can't be real, Amara murmured, clutching a cup of hot tea. We were volunteering hours before all of this. I mean, that's proof, right? Nina nodded. I'm going to gather every piece of evidence, security footage, testimony from the kids you were tutoring, staff sign-in logs. We won't let them bury you under false charges. Clarice and Leonard tried to offer supportive smiles, the worry etched deep lines into their faces. The twins could see that these charges weighed heavily on their parents. With finances already tight, making bail was a significant strain, and that was just the first hurdle. Legal fees would be another massive burden, not to mention the emotional toll of fighting an unjust accusation. Amara stared out the diner window. A police cruiser drove by slowly, and for a split second, she thought she saw Officer Kilroy's face in the passenger seat, staring her down. She swallowed hard. I feel like they're watching us, she whispered. Nina took a quick glance. Let them watch. We have nothing to hide. They, on the other hand. She paused, choosing her words carefully. From what I've heard in back channels, there might be an active investigation from the Department of Justice into certain police departments in Mississippi, corruption, racial profiling, that kind of thing. Leonard leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Really? Have they specifically mentioned Hawthorne City PD? I don't have confirmation, Nina admitted, but I suspect if they dig deep, these officers, Walters and Kilroy especially, could be on someone's radar. Her words kindled a small spark of hope in the group. If the DOJ was indeed investigating local police misconduct, perhaps Alana and Amara's case would gain federal attention. The sisters exchanged a look. They still felt the sting of being laughed at in court by the very men who had set them up. But maybe their day of reckoning would come sooner than expected. For now, though, the reality was harsh, an arraignment looming, potential felony charges, and a community awash in rumors. The laughter of those cops still rang in their ears. But as they left the diner, walking hand in hand through the late afternoon sunlight, they resolved that no amount of mocking or intimidation would keep the truth buried. Somewhere far above the corrupt machinery of local law enforcement, the wheels of justice had begun to turn, and soon, the sisters hoped, the entire system that allowed those officers to laugh at them in court would be rattled to its core. Coming up on Dark Stories, the family's desperate fight turns explosive when a midnight call from the DOJ reveals the cops' deepest, darkest secret. Over the next few weeks, the Mitchell household turned into a makeshift legal war room. Files and notes cluttered the dining room table, testimony outlines and phone call logs pinned to a bulletin board. Alana and Amara spent hours with Nina Barnes, recounting every detail of their day leading up to the arrest, right down to the flavor of ice cream they'd planned to buy. The thoroughness was exhausting but necessary. Every minute detail could be a key to unraveling the false narrative Walters and Kilroy had woven. Yet, for all their diligent preparation, an invisible threat seemed to loom. Friends in the community were divided, some openly supported the sisters, while others grew distant, fueled by gossip or fear of tangling with the police. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor whispered to Clarice that bad people were asking around about the family, people who flashed badges but didn't seem like real detectives. Another day, Leonard found a crudely typed note taped to his car windshield: "Stop pushing. You don't know who you're dealing with." Despite the fear creeping into their lives, Alana and Amara tried to keep their spirits up. They clung to small routines, jogging together at dawn, cooking dinner with their parents, and volunteering at the youth center again as soon as they were allowed. They needed to show the world and themselves that they wouldn't be intimidated. One late evening, as the twins were finishing an online study session, they were both enrolled in community college courses, the family phone rang. Clarice answered in the kitchen, her voice drifting upstairs. A pause, then the audible sound of her letting out a quick gasp. Alana and Amara rushed down to see Clarice holding the phone, tears shimmering in her eyes. "That was someone from the Department of Justice," Clarice explained, her voice trembling with cautious excitement. "They're aware of your case, and they want to meet with you. They wouldn't give details over the phone, but they mentioned a deeper investigation." She glanced at Leonard, who nodded, placing a calming hand on his wife's shoulder. The next afternoon, a pair of officials arrived at the Mitchell home. One introduced herself as Special Agent Carla Ruiz from the FBI, assigned to a DOJ task force investigating police misconduct. The other was an assistant U.S. attorney named Daniel Barrer from the Civil Rights Division. Both flashed their credentials, verifying that they were indeed who they claimed to be. Their demeanor was serious but polite. Agent Ruiz settled in the living room, scanning the environment. She locked eyes with Alana and Amara, her expression resolute. "First, let me say how sorry I am for what you've been through. We'd like to ask you some questions, if you're willing." The sisters glanced at each other, then nodded. Leonard and Clarice offered coffee, but the agents politely declined, jumping straight into business. They asked about the arrest, the details of the search, the behavior of Officers Walters and Kilroy, the entire sequence of events that night. Barrer tapped away at a laptop while Ruiz listened intently, occasionally prompting them for more information. When the interview ended, Barrer closed his computer. "We can't promise immediate relief," he warned gently, "but we suspect this fits a pattern we've seen in certain Mississippi police departments: unexplained drug busts involving individuals with no prior records, racial profiling, planted evidence. We're building a federal case, and we believe your testimony could be crucial." Hope warred with trepidation in Alana's heart. "So, they might finally face consequences?" she asked, almost afraid of being too optimistic. Ruiz exchanged a glance with Barrer. "If we establish a pattern of civil rights violations, those responsible could face serious federal charges. But you should also be aware that the road ahead will be difficult. Corruption runs deep, and these officers may not go down without a fight." The Mitchell family exchanged determined looks. Nina Barnes, who had joined them for the interview, spoke up. "They won't intimidate us into silence. It's gone too far already." The agents left, promising to keep in touch. For the first time since the ordeal began, Alana and Amara felt a sense of vindication. It was as though a weight had been partially lifted. The next few days brought more phone calls from the DOJ, more visits, and an official request that Alana and Amara appear before a grand jury if needed. The seeds of a larger investigation were being planted. But there were also unsettling developments. Late one night, as Alana stared out her bedroom window, she noticed a dark car idling at the end of their street, headlights off, engine quietly humming. It sat there for almost an hour before finally pulling away. Another time, Amara received a series of anonymous calls that ended the moment she answered. Nina assured them it was likely harassment tactics to dissuade their cooperation with federal authorities. Then came the whispers about Walters and Kilroy. Rumors surfaced that they were part of a clandestine network of officers who boosted departmental statistics by planting drugs on unsuspecting individuals, mostly young black men and women. Some claimed these cops were protected by higher-ups, given free rein to orchestrate busts in order to win promotions or departmental accolades. If the rumor mill was correct, Walters and Kilroy had a lot more to hide than just one planted bag of powder. One evening, the sisters found themselves quietly talking in their shared bedroom, discussing the next steps. They agreed that if the DOJ needed them to testify or provide more statements, they would do so wholeheartedly. Their fear was still there, gnawing at the edges, but their resolve burned brighter. "We have to speak out," Amara said firmly. "Not just for us, but for everyone else they've wronged." Alana nodded, giving her sister's hand a squeeze. In their darkest moments, they remembered the courtroom laughter that had mocked their innocence. It fueled them, steeled their nerves. Because they weren't just fighting for their freedom, they were fighting to expose a corrupt system, to prevent more innocent people from enduring the same nightmare. Little did they know that the laughter of those two racist cops would eventually turn into frantic pleas, once the DOJ peeled back the rotten layers of their secrets. Because indeed, Walters and Kilroy had a hidden skeleton, one so dark that it threatened not only their badges, but the entire foundation of the police department that harbored them. You won't believe what's next on Dark Stories, the moment the feds raid the station, and the officer smirks vanish forever. In mid-August, the first domino fell. Local news outlets reported the suspension of 2 Hawthorne City officers pending an internal affairs investigation. Initially, the report didn't name Walters or Kilroy, but the rumor mill kicked into high gear, and within hours, it became clear who was under scrutiny. Alana and Amara watched from their living room as the local channel aired grainy footage of a press conference outside the Hawthorne City Police Department. The police chief, a rigid man named Colonel Harold March, reluctantly read a prepared statement. "We have received allegations of misconduct against 2 of our officers. While the department will not tolerate any wrongdoing, we ask the public to await the results of the investigation before drawing conclusions." March's tone was firm yet evasive. He took no questions, quickly retreating inside the building. The camera then panned to a swarm of reporters speculating about the seriousness of the charges and whether this was connected to the federal investigation rumored to be happening behind closed doors. In the Mitchell home, Nina Barnes clutched her phone, scanning calls and messages from contacts in the legal sphere. Each update painted a more damning picture for Walters and Kilroy. "It looks like they've been implicated in planting evidence in at least 3 different arrests," Nina murmured, excitement laced with caution. "If that's true, we're starting to see a clear pattern." A few days later, the Department of Justice made a formal announcement of a broad civil rights investigation into the Hawthorne City PD. Although no names were mentioned, the statement carried weight, citing multiple credible complaints of racial bias, evidence tampering, and potential violations of constitutional rights. Attorney General Merrick Garland himself had signed off on the inquiry. It was a momentous step, a small Mississippi town under the microscope of the highest federal legal authority. Meanwhile, Walters and Kilroy attempted to keep a low profile. They were effectively relieved of their duties but not fully arrested yet. They were confined to administrative tasks, though it soon became clear the department didn't want them in the building at all. Local radio hosts speculated that the pair had sought legal representation from a high-profile law firm in Jackson. Others whispered that they might try to skip town. As the official scrutiny intensified, so did the odd presence of unknown cars outside the Mitchell residence. One night, Alana was certain she spotted Walter's silhouette in a passing vehicle. Another time, Clarice swore she heard footsteps in the backyard, though no one was found when Leonard searched with a flashlight. Nina, alarmed, suggested installing security cameras. Even more alarming were the stories that began surfacing about Walters and Kilroy's personal lives. A man named Darnell Thompson, who'd worked at a nearby auto shop, approached Nina with a disturbing tale. He claimed that Walters had blackmailed him into installing hidden compartments in vehicles to stage drug busts. Another woman, a teacher from a neighboring county, recounted a chilling traffic stop where Kilroy threatened her with arrest unless she gave him any name of someone involved in drugs. The teacher refused, was briefly detained, and later released without explanation. She hadn't spoken of it out of fear until now. Each story chipped away at the veneer of legitimacy around these officers, and each story fueled the sense that something more sinister lurked behind their orchestrated drug arrests. Possibly a plan to funnel money, seize property, or extort the innocent. One late afternoon, while Alana and Amara were reviewing legal documents with Nina, the phone rang. Clarice answered, her face turning pale as she listened. After a tense minute, she hung up and turned to the others. "That was the assistant U.S. attorney," she said, eyes wide. "They found something big on Walters and Kilroy, something about deep ties and deliberate targeting. They want you two to come in tomorrow to provide more statements." Nina's eyebrows lifted in cautious optimism. This could be the break we've been waiting for. The next day, the twins and Nina arrived at a small federal building in Jackson, Mississippi, where they were greeted by Agent Ruiz and Daniel Bearer. They were escorted to a secure conference room, where they found a trove of documents spread across a long table, photos, transcripts, even grainy surveillance images. A sense of gravity filled the space. Bearer pointed to a file. "We've uncovered a pattern in Walters and Kilroy's arrests. Roughly 90% of their major drug busts involve people of color. We cross-checked these arrests with ballistics, forensics, and even financial records. It appears that in numerous cases, the evidence was either inconclusive or outright fabricated." Alana's pulse quickened. They did it so brazenly. How did they think they'd get away with it for so long? Agent Ruiz answered, her voice tinged with frustration. "Small-town ecosystems can be insular. A few people in power can protect each other. People who tried to speak up were too scared. But your case, along with others coming forward, has cracked the wall of silence." She flipped through more photos. Walters and Kilroy kept trophies, photos of their so-called busts, receipts of seized assets, text messages bragging about it. They even shared pictures with each other of the people they arrested, often mocking them with racist or demeaning comments. The revelation churned Alana's stomach. She swallowed hard. "So, what happens next?" Bearer exchanged a look with Ruiz. "We believe we have enough evidence to bring federal civil rights charges against them. But we're aiming for more than just those two. There might be higher-ups complicit in this scheme. We want to make sure we dismantle the entire operation." Nina placed a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder. "That would also greatly strengthen our defense in your case, proving the evidence against you is planted." Agent Ruiz nodded. "Exactly. And if we can connect the dots back to the night of your arrest, it'll be a nail in the coffin for any charges against you." As they concluded the meeting, hope mingled with a grim awareness of the darkness they were facing. The more the DOJ uncovered, the clearer it became that Walters and Kilroy's wrongdoing spanned years, leaving a trail of shattered lives. Yet, the laughter that once haunted Alana and Amara in the courtroom might soon echo back on the perpetrators, multiplied by the weight of federal law. Still, the sisters knew victory wouldn't come without cost. Their public stance made them targets. Each new revelation risked more intimidation, more attempts at retaliation from those who didn't want the truth to come out. But the glimmer of justice, of exoneration, propelled them forward. They left the federal building that day with a renewed sense of purpose. And though they were not yet free of fear, they understood that truth was the most potent antidote to corruption, and that truth was on their side, growing stronger with every domino that fell. The twists keep coming on Dark Stories. Will the sisters' courage expose even more corruption? Or will the cops strike back one last time? Every secret revealed. Amid the swirling revelations, Alana and Amara tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, attending online classes, helping around the house, and volunteering at the youth center. Yet, their lives had become uncomfortably public, with journalists occasionally knocking on their door, seeking exclusive interviews. Nina advised them to keep media interactions limited, lest they say something that could be twisted or used against them. However, one evening, a surprising visitor came calling at the Mitchell home. It was a man in his late 30s, dressed in a wrinkled suit, hair slightly disheveled. He introduced himself as Gerald Jerry McLennan, a reporter from the Clarion Ledger, one of Mississippi's larger newspapers, based in Jackson. "I've been digging into police corruption in Hawthorne City for months," he explained, standing on the porch while the sisters and their parents listened wearily. "I have records, court transcripts, depositions, internal memos that paint a very grim picture of Walters and Kilroy. I think your story might be the key to blowing this wide open, but I need your help." Alana and Amara exchanged uncertain glances. Before they could respond, Clarice stepped in. "We have legal counsel," she said politely but firmly. "We can't just give out statements on the porch." Jerry nodded, an air of understanding about him. He slipped a business card from his pocket. "I get it. I'm not here to ambush you. Please just pass my card to your lawyer. If there's any information you can share, on or off the record, I believe it could make a difference." The card read, "Gerald McLennan, investigative journalist," with contact details beneath. Clarice took it cautiously. After he left, they gathered in the living room, uncertain about the risk. Nina, when informed, suggested caution. Journalistic integrity varied, and one wrong quote could spark legal complications. Still, McLennan's mention of internal memos intrigued her, especially if it corroborated the DOJ's findings. While the twins weighed the pros and cons of speaking with the press, old memories began resurfacing. Days later, a knock at the door revealed another unexpected face: Carmen Reed, a childhood friend of Alana and Amara who had moved away after high school. She entered the living room timidly, her posture tense. "I came as soon as I heard," she said. I have something to tell you." Carmen explained that years ago, her cousin Marcus had been arrested by Walters and Kilroy under similarly dubious circumstances, accused of drug possession. Marcus had served a short sentence, but the experience ruined his prospects, pushing him out of college and leaving a permanent mark on his record. Carmen admitted that her family had been too afraid to speak out, worried about retaliation or further arrests. "Marcus kept telling me he was innocent," Carmen said, tears forming in her eyes. "He said the cops planted the drugs. We didn't believe him at first. Now, seeing what you're going through, I realized he was telling the truth." Alana's heart sank. She understood the weight of that fear. "Would your cousin be willing to speak to the DOJ?" she asked softly. Carmen shrugged, uncertain. "He's angry, bitter, but maybe if he knows he's not alone, he might come forward." Nina, who joined them by phone, urged them to encourage Marcus to step up. The more victims who testify, the stronger the case against Walters, Kilroy, and potentially other complicit officers. The shadows of the past were indeed catching up, forming a collective voice that demanded justice. In the following weeks, Nina filed motions in the local court to dismiss all charges against Alana and Amara, armed with new evidence from the DOJ. The hearing date loomed, and tension soared. Supporters of the twins began rallying on social media, using hashtags and local Facebook groups to call out corruption. Many recalled the twins' long-standing commitment to the community, insisting they would never engage in drug activity. On the other side, a small but vocal faction in the city, some with ties to law enforcement, painted the twins as troublemakers. Anonymous online trolls spewed racist remarks, claiming the sisters were exploiting race to dodge charges. Officers Walters and Kilroy, for their part, maintained their innocence, even giving a brief interview to a local station where they called the allegations fake news orchestrated by anti-police activists. Then came the day that changed everything. In a coordinated series of raids, the DOJ task force descended on multiple sites, including the Hawthorne City Police Department. Witnesses described the startling scene: federal agents marching through the station, seizing files and computer hard drives. By evening, news broke that Walters and Kilroy had been taken into federal custody, indicted on charges of conspiracy, civil rights violations, and falsification of evidence. The sight of the two officers, handcuffed and flanked by federal agents, flashed across television screens throughout Mississippi. It was a surreal reversal of the original courtroom tableau where Walters and Kilroy had smirked at Alana and Amara. This time, there was no smirking, just ashen faces filled with dread. For the Mitchell family, this was both a triumph and a moment of sobering realization. The twin sisters had sparked a domino effect that reached far beyond their own case. Yet, the legal process was far from over. Alana and Amara's hearing approached, and despite the mounting evidence in their favor, the local prosecutor still held the official charges. It would take a judge's ruling to fully exonerate them. In the hush of a late-night family gathering, as they watched the day's events play out on the news, Clarice turned to her daughters. "One day, you'll look back on this and realize how strong you both were," she said, her voice trembling with pride. "You took on a system that's been broken for far too long." Alana and Amara exchanged a quiet smile. For a moment, they recalled the humiliating laughter in the courtroom, the cold nights in jail, the fear of menacing eyes outside their home. Soon, they hoped, the same men who once mocked them would stand trial for their own crimes, and that, in itself, felt like a step toward justice, not just for them, but for an entire community long haunted by the shadows of racist policing. The finale is here on Dark Stories. Watch as the gavel falls, charges vanish, and the cops face their ultimate downfall. The morning of Alana and Amara's hearing arrived like a thunderclap. Outside the Hawthorne City Courthouse, a cluster of supporters gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for the Mitchell Sisters" and "Stop Racial Profiling." A handful of counter-protesters milled nearby, but the mood felt distinctly in favor of the twins. Reporters, smelling a major story, lined the steps, cameras poised. Inside the courtroom, bustle with a tension that was almost electric. Court officers tried to maintain order as spectators filed into the wooden benches. Nina Barnes stood near the defense table, flipping through a thick binder of evidence and motions. Alana and Amara, dressed neatly and standing tall, joined her. They felt the eyes of the courtroom on them, some sympathetic, others critical, but all intently curious. Judge Cohen, the same judge who had presided over their bail hearing, took the bench. His gaze swept the room as he called the proceedings to order. Despite the swirl of national attention, he bore a weary expression, as though he was bracing himself for the day's battle. The prosecutor, looking visibly less confident than before, rose to speak. He began by reciting the original charges against Alana and Amara: possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. But before he could launch into any argument, Nina Barnes interjected with a motion to dismiss all charges. She calmly enumerated the reasons: new evidence from the DOJ investigation, sworn statements from witnesses alleging police misconduct, and the federal indictments against Officers Walters and Kilroy. The prosecutor fumbled. He insisted the local case remained valid, but he couldn't ignore the avalanche of federal findings. Judge Cohen leaned forward, hands folded. "I've reviewed the DOJ documents," he said sternly. "They paint a damning picture of systemic wrongdoing. I need to hear a compelling argument from the prosecution as to why these charges should remain." The prosecutor, clearly flustered, tried to claim that the DOJ's investigation was ongoing and that local charges could stand independently. Nina, unflinching, produced a statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office explicitly naming Alana and Amara as victims of planted evidence. She also presented a subpoenaed set of text messages between Walters and Kilroy, messages that proved the officers had discussed pinning something on the twins to make an example of them. A hush fell over the courtroom as Nina read one exchange aloud. "Walters, got 2 girls. Real pretty, real smug. They'll fold easy if we find the right evidence. Kilroy, yeah, let's teach them a lesson. Just a little powder for them to cry about." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and even Judge Cohen's stoic expression cracked in shock. Alana's heart pounded. Hearing the callous words from Walters and Kilroy made her stomach twist with anger, but it also ignited relief that their duplicity was finally exposed. After reviewing the messages, Judge Cohen removed his glasses. "I find this deeply concerning. Given the overwhelming evidence that the arresting officers acted with gross misconduct, I'm inclined to dismiss all charges against the defendants." A muffled cheer erupted from the supporters in the gallery. Alana grabbed Amara's hand, tears of gratitude and vindication welling in their eyes. Nina placed a steadying hand on Alana's shoulder. However, the judge wasn't finished. His gaze zeroed in on the prosecutor. "Furthermore, I expect a formal review of every case handled by these officers, effective immediately. This case against the Mitchell sisters is dismissed. They leave this courtroom free of these charges, and I sincerely hope the justice system rectifies any and all wrongs done to them." Gavel down, a resounding crack. The room erupted in applause from their supporters. Alana and Amara exhaled in unison, the tension draining from their bodies. They were free. In that moment, the memory of the courtroom laughter all those weeks ago transformed into a testament of their resilience and the power of truth. Outside, a wave of journalists surged toward them. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. Nina quickly guided the sisters to a small podium set up by a local activist group. Alana, heart still hammering, steadied herself at the microphone. "Today's dismissal is a relief," she began, voice shaking slightly. "But we're not just here to celebrate our victory. We're here to call attention to everyone who has been wronged by a system that allowed two corrupt officers to plant evidence and destroy lives. This is not the end, it's just the beginning of a much larger fight for accountability." Amara stepped forward. "We thank everyone who believed in us, who spoke out, who helped unearth the truth. We stand with those who are still fighting for their innocence. We won't rest until justice is served for all." The crowd cheered, and camera shutters clicked like thunder. The sun shone overhead, revealing a new dawn for the sisters. For the first time in weeks, they could breathe freely, unburdened by the weight of false accusations. But the day's events weren't over. As they made their way down the courthouse steps, flanked by family, friends, and supporters, Alana spotted two familiar figures in orange jumpsuits being led in by federal marshals, Walters and Kilroy. Their once cocky expressions were now hollowed by fear. Gone was the arrogance, the laughter replaced by the grim realization that their darkest secrets were laid bare. For a fleeting moment, Alana and Kilroy locked eyes. She felt no pity, only a firm sense of karmic justice. He quickly averted his gaze, as if the sight of her was too much to bear. And in that instant, she knew the tide had fully turned. The gavel had fallen, and the days of mocking the innocent were over. The laughter of racist cops had been silenced by a truth far more powerful, and far more enduring. But the story doesn't end there. On Dark Stories, discover how the sisters turn their pain into a nationwide movement for change. In the aftermath of their dramatic court victory, Alana and Amara found themselves navigating a wave of public attention. Invitations flooded in from local churches wanting them to speak about social justice, from colleges seeking them to address student groups, and even from media outlets hoping for exclusive interviews. Initially overwhelmed, they quickly realized that their story had touched a nerve in the broader conversation about policing and racism in America. While the sisters felt a responsibility to use their newfound platform wisely, they also yearned for the simple joys of normal life. Free from bail restrictions, they could attend classes in person and return to volunteering at the youth center without the constant specter of possible incarceration looming over them. Their mother, Clarice, no longer woke in the middle of the night with tear-streaked cheeks, and their father, Leonard, could talk about future plans like attending the twins' graduation and taking a family vacation they'd long postponed. The federal investigation into Hawthorne City PD continued, unearthing a web of corruption that implicated not only Walters and Kilroy, but also a handful of other officers and possibly higher-ranking individuals. Whispers circulated about new departmental leadership taking shape, overseen by a federal monitor to ensure real reforms. Some in the community were skeptical that real change could happen, but others felt a renewed sense of hope. One bright autumn afternoon, Agent Carla Ruiz visited the Mitchell home once more, this time bearing good news. "The civil rights trial against Walters and Kilroy is set for early next year," she explained. "Your testimony and evidence are pivotal. You'll likely be called upon to speak about your ordeal." Alana and Amara were ready. No threat or intimidation could silence them now. "We'll be there," Alana said confidently, reflecting on how far they'd come since that terrifying night of their arrest. With their immediate legal troubles behind them, Nina Barnes encouraged the twins to file a civil lawsuit against the city for damages, loss of reputation, emotional distress, and legal fees. After careful consideration, they agreed, not out of greed, but out of principle. If the city had to pay, maybe it would serve as a financial push to reform. The lawsuit garnered even more attention, thrusting them further into the public eye. And so, on a crisp November evening, the family held a small gathering in their backyard to celebrate a sort of freedom party. Close friends, neighbors, and new allies arrived, sharing potluck dishes and warm hugs. Carmen Reed came with Marcus, who'd finally agreed to speak to the DOJ about his own wrongful arrest. He thanked the sisters for inspiring him to come forward, tears in his eyes as he recalled his lost opportunities. "That's all we wanted," Amara replied softly. "4 people to stand together and refuse to be silenced." The next day, they received a thick envelope from the Clarion Ledger's Jerry McLennan. Inside were copies of internal police memos and emails detailing how Walters and Kilroy had been protected by certain superiors who turned a blind eye to suspicious cases. One email even referenced a plan to target problematic individuals who spoke out against the department. Reading the lines, Alana shuddered at the near miss. Had they not fought back, they might have become just another statistic buried under false charges. Their story was gaining national traction. A well-known civil rights activist from Jackson visited them, offering moral support and a platform to speak on a larger stage. Alana and Amara agreed to appear at a panel discussion on systemic racism and policing. The auditorium buzzed with hundreds of listeners as they recounted their journey, from volunteering at a youth center to being strip-searched in a cold holding cell, to standing victorious in the courtroom where, not so long ago, they had been publicly mocked. Despite the heaviness of the subject, their message carried an undercurrent of hope. "If 2 college students from Hawthorne City can stand up and spark change," Amara said, voice resonating through the microphone, "imagine what an entire community, an entire nation, can do." The applause was thunderous. Flashbulbs captured their earnest faces, and social media lit up with praise for the twins' resilience and courage. Offers poured in for partnerships with nonprofits, scholarships, and even a potential book deal. But at the core, Alana and Amara simply wanted justice, not fame. They vowed to channel any influence or support they received into uplifting others who still struggled under the weight of unjust accusations. Weeks turned into months, and the daily anxiety that once consumed them now transformed into purposeful action. Their civil case made steady progress, with settlement talks beginning to percolate. The city attorneys were clearly eager to avoid a high-profile trial. Meanwhile, Walters and Kilroy rotted in federal custody, awaiting their own day in court, an ironic reversal of their earlier hubris. In a final twist of fate, it came to light that Walters had fathered a child out of state and used illicit funds from seized property to send hush money to the mother. The explosive revelation further solidified the public's condemnation of his actions. Kilroy, for his part, had a long paper trail of racial slurs in emails and text messages, evidence that left no doubt about the racist intent behind his policing tactics. With each new revelation, the city's patience for these disgraced officers wore thinner. It became painfully clear that Alana and Amara's case was just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. The entire apparatus that allowed men like Walters and Kilroy to operate with impunity was now under the microscope, promising a sweeping overhaul. As winter approached, Alana and Amara stood on their porch, sipping hot cocoa, their breath visible in the crisp air. They silently acknowledged the journey they had taken, from the moment they were cornered and arrested to the day the charges were dropped and beyond. A wave of gratitude washed over them for the outpouring of community and federal support that had ultimately proven their innocence. The laughter that had once mocked them in a dingy courtroom was gone, replaced by the resolute chorus of voices demanding real, lasting change. It was a new dawn in Hawthorne City, one in which the twin sisters were proud to play their part. And while the scars of the ordeal would remain, those scars would also serve as a reminder of their strength, of the power that lies in truth, and of the justice that can be achieved when good people refuse to remain silent. Thank you for joining us on this intense and emotional journey, where false accusations gave way to undeniable truths, and corrupt officers were finally held accountable for their misdeeds. Alana and Amara's story reminds us that no matter how bleak things may seem, courage, truth, and unity can spark change even in the face of the deepest injustice. If you were moved by this story and believe in standing up against corruption, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Dark Stories. Every click helps spread awareness and encourages more people to speak out when they see wrongdoing. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Tell us what resonated with you the most, and share your own experiences or thoughts on the power of accountability. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and continue pushing for reforms that protect the innocent and uphold true justice.